All right, welcome back to Tom Kennedy Science. We're going to explore the universe. And in today's episode, we are going to explore the support for evolution by natural selection. Now, there's a lot of it out there. I mean, we've been supporting evolution since 1859 when Darwin first published On the Origin of Species. And he actually had evidence going back nearly 2 decades before that when he was on the HMS Beagle from 1831 to 1836. Now, like I said, there's lots and lots of evidence for evolution. People have been studying it for 160 or so years. We have entire journals that come out monthly with people studying evolution. But for this lecture, I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to go to 3 different lines of evidence. One is the fossil record. The second one is evidence from homologies. And the other one is evidence from our very own DNA. And we're going to look at some similarities across all organisms, which is very interesting. Okay, let's look at the fossil record. Now, you may have heard that the fossil record is largely incomplete, doesn't have every species that's ever lived. It's biased toward things with hard parts, so you have to have bones or shells. Okay, yeah, it's incomplete. No worries. I mean, in fact, we don't even really know the full extent of diversity over time. And in fact, it's been estimated that something like or 1% of all species that have ever lived are alive today, which means 99 to 98% of all species have gone extinct, and we may not have a record of most of them. But despite the largely incompleteness of the fossil record, there's some things about it that fully support evolution. One, younger fossils are on top of older ones. The superposition, right? Now, I mean, sometimes, rock layers can get folded and twisted around and folded and stuff. But in general, younger fossils are on top of older fossils. So when you dig down into the fossil record, you find older and older fossils. And what we see is the evolution of different lineages. We see these things change over time. We see the evolution of vertebrates as they moved onto land 375 million years ago, and they evolved into amphibians. And then we see the evolution of the first amniotes, which are reptiles and the ancestors to mammals. We see the clear progression of the evolution of mammals. We have fossil record for the evolution of man, right? Now, importantly, when you look at this chart over here, and it has a Paleozoic, that's, from 542 million years ago to 251 million years ago, we don't see dinosaur fossils in the Paleozoic. That's because dinosaurs didn't show up until the Mesozoic, from 251 to 65 million years ago. And in fact, the first dinosaurs showed up around 230 or so million years ago, and they lived all the way until, well, they went extinct, probably due to a meteor, maybe some volcanism going on. Either way, they went extinct pretty abruptly about 65, 66 million years ago. And then in the Cenozoic, we see the rise of modern mammals. So yeah, we don't find fossils of modern humans next to dinosaur fossils because we're separated by 65, 66 million years. Even Darwin, when he published On the Origin of Species, says, you know what? We're going to find transitional fossils. And a transitional fossil is like this one. It's called Archaeopteryx. It's a fancy word meaning old wing. And it was discovered in the 1860s in Germany. I know, right after Darwin published his book, right? And what it shows is a transition between dinosaurs and birds. I know, dinosaurs, birds evolved from dinosaurs, right? And in fact, they evolved from a therapsid dinosaur. Did I get that right? A theropod dinosaur, related to T-Rex. Any rate, this fossil of Archaeopteryx is a transitional fossil because it has characters of both modern day birds and dinosaurs. So for example, birds don't have teeth, but this animal had teeth. Oh, by the way, birds actually have the relic genes to make teeth. They're there. The genes just don't work anymore. They've been mutated, but they're there. This bird also has a bony tail, much like a dinosaur. Modern day birds have lost their bony tails. When you see a tail on a bird, it's just feathers. And they also, look closely, there's claws in those wings. And modern day birds, with the exception of one species, lacks claws in the wings. So, yeah, there it is. Halfway between dinosaur and bird, right? It's got characters of both. And we can look at the feathers and realize this animal could fly 145 million years ago. Now, the criticism that I brought up earlier, hey, the fossil record is incomplete. That's all right. You may not see every intermediate. It's like our technology, right? When was the last time you saw a Commodore 64 or an Atari, whatever it was back then, Atari PlayStation, whatever they called those Ataris back then? That was back in the 80s compared to the Xboxes and whatever you're using today. There's been a clear progression in that technology. How many of you, for instance, have an iPhone 1, an iPhone 2 or a 3 or a 4 or a 5? I mean, they're already on iPhone, 15 coming out? And the earlier models are largely gone. We don't even see them. Or when was the last time you saw a cathode ray tube TV, a CRT TV, right? Yeah, it's been like 20 years. That is gone. So in the fossil record, even though we don't see the intermediates, we do find them, and we can clearly see the progression of lineages changing over time. Now, the other interesting thing, whenever we have theories are broad, powerful explanations for a large set of phenomena. So evolution by natural selection explains why species change over time, right? So we know that species change over time. And part of being science is this idea, this philosophy that at least one type of observation or experimental result could refute it. So for example, in the fossil record, what we never find is a modern day animal like a human next to a dinosaur. If we did, that would refute evolution, but we never see that. It's never been found, nor do we expect to find it. And this is my AI generated view of the Terminator riding a dinosaur. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I had to do it. Okay, moving on from the fossil record. Despite its incompleteness, still supports evolution. Does not refute it. Okay, you ever notice that like a whale fin on the right there, a bird wing, that's actually I think a cat paw and a human arm. We all share these things in common. We have a humerus, a radius and an ulna, carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. One bone, two bone, lots of bones. You see, that pattern was inherited from the earliest vertebrates that evolved to live on land over 370 million years ago. And that pattern has been largely kept over time. Now, there are times when it gets modified. Snakes have lost their limbs, but some snakes even have very vestigial limbs. Whales have a vestigial pelvic girdle. All right. But these homologies, which are shared features like the forelimbs of vertebrates, well, they're homologies because they all derive from a common ancestor, but they've been modified into different things. Even the bird wing is very different from a pterodactyl or a pterosaur wing and a bat wing. All three of those organisms can fly by modifying their front limb, but they each did it slightly differently. So we see this all the time, that we see features that get modified to do different things. Now here's an interesting one. Support from our DNA. Now this support goes all the way back to supporting, that humans are closely related to chimps, that all humans are mammals and related to all other mammals, to humans are all related to other vertebrates, all other animals, other eukaryotes, and that there is actually a common ancestry to all life on this planet. And it's in our DNA. Okay, so for example, all life uses the same DNA. You can think of it as 4 letters, right? Adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. Every living organism on this planet uses those 4 nucleotides to store genetic information. Not only that, the sequence of those letters, the A's, the T's, the G's, and the C's, forming a word like Gattaca. That's Gattaca. It's a movie. That has meaning. It codes for amino acids which make proteins. And that's what we call the genetic code. And that genetic code is nearly universal, which means if I have a gene in a human to make something like insulin, I can insert it into every other living organism on this planet, including bacteria, and it will make the same protein. And in fact, we modified E. coli back in the 1970s by putting a human gene into it to make to make glucose. And we had our first GMO to make, not to make glucose, sorry, to make insulin. And as a result, we've made insulin from using GMOs. The reason why is we share this universal genetic code. Now it goes on from there. Not only do we share the same genetic code, we also share pseudogenes. This is how we know we're closely related to chimpanzees, a little bit more distant related to apes, but still related to all the mammals. And here's what a pseudogene is. Imagine this. You've got a dog, right? Your dog lives through its nose. Dogs have over 1,000 genes to detect odors. And that's called a gene family. And they were created by mutations back in the early origins of mammals. Well, in humans, we evolved better eyesight and we kind of gave up some of our sense of smell. That's okay. We have about 500 or so genes for detecting odors, but we have the pseudogenes to detect odors that are in a dog. And if you look at a dolphin or a whale, guess what? They also have those same pseudogenes to detect odors, but they've all mutated. None of them work. So dolphins can't detect any odors in their environment. Okay, so we got the pseudogenes, and the more of these we share in common, the more closer we are related to each other. We have shared gene families, shared genes, and shared metabolic pathways. Okay, this metabolic pathway, a metabolic pathway is a sequence of chemical reactions. Think glycolysis, which is like the first step of cellular respiration. It's fundamental to our metabolism because it starts off by breaking down something like glucose into these smaller molecules, then get fed into the Krebs cycle, right? That then break it down further and we extract energy from it doing that. Okay, that would be a metabolic pathway. This is the citric acid cycle here, showing this series of chemical reactions. For those chemical reactions to work, you need enzymes, which are coded for by genes. So if we're carrying out the citric acid cycle and a bacteria is also carrying out the citric acid cycle with the same genes to do that. Why do we have the same genes to do that? Shared ancestry. All in all, check this out. You and me and a fungus and a plant and a bacteria and an archaean, we share somewhere around 100 to 135 metabolic pathways that are ubiquitous to life. That shows that we all come from common ancestry and that we've been evolving ever since. And to have those shared metabolic pathways, we share hundreds of genes in common to make versions of those proteins. All right. So that to me is amazing. The history of our evolution and our relatedness to all other organisms is right in our very own genome. So that's the basic support for evolution by natural selection. And of course, I'm saying evolution by natural selection because that is adaptive evolution rather than random evolution through, for those of you into the higher level evolution classes, things like gene flow, mutations, and genetic drift. All right. Well, I hope you learned something today. Stay curious.